Over there is probably the most expensive gas we've ever bought. Some also say the worst deal of all time.
Fracking.
Fracking. Fracking. Fracking.
Liquefied natural gas.
LNG.
Produced in the US with fracking and then shipped to Germany as liquefied gas.
Earthquakes polluting of underground water systems.
Germany paid more than any other country in the world.
All with the argument that this will allow us to shut down our coal-fired power plants.
Jetzt möge man sich vorstellen, was passiert, wenn wir 2024 sagen müssen, wir haben nicht genug Gas, wir müssen die Kohlekraftwerke weiterlaufen lassen.
All around me, here are factories, and I'm not allowed to show them because the sheriff was just here and strongly told me that I better not do that.
And with Trump as president.
Drill, baby, drill.
And Chris Wright, a fracking entrepreneur, as his energy minister, this issue is more relevant than ever. And it raises a question, is this an unfair deal?
It's really good for American business, but the fact that we're talking methane is even more destructive to the environment than coal.
Or is it a necessary evil? And what are the alternatives? My name is Dr. Jakob Beautemps. I'm a science journalist and YouTuber from Germany, and today I want to take a closer look at LNG and explore the question of whether it really is a solution to our gas problem or not. A large proportion of the LNG gas from the US that arrives in Germany is produced by unconventional fracking, a process that has been banned in Germany since 2017. This involves first drilling a hole up to 5 kilometers deep and then drilling another hole up to 1.5 kilometers to the side at the very bottom. This step is a drilling. In the next step, which is actually fracking, a mixture of water, sand and chemicals is pressed into the ground at around 1000 bar. This blasts open the ground below and allows the gas and oil contained in the ground to escape.
Wow, are you really in the middle of nowhere? And I wasn't really aware of that before. This difference, tracking, that takes about a week, maybe 2 weeks. That's when the ground is really opened up. And after that, natural gas or oil can be extracted here for a very long time.
And this is already happening en masse and for a good reason. But let's go back in time a little. At the beginning of the 2000s, there was a major problem for US policy. Statistics showed that the USA was becoming more and more dependent on oil imports, while its own oil exports were low. And there was a phrase that came up very often, which we have also become very familiar with in Germany recently.
Because if we're going to end our dependence on foreign oil, we've got to develop every single source of American energy.
And one of the big steps for this was to produce more oil at home, something that fracking made possible again. Today, the USA has become one of the largest gas and oil exports in the world, and Germany also receives liquefied natural gas from the United States. But at what price? And how sensible can the whole thing be when you see what consequences it has, and also how contradictory the whole thing sometimes seems?
I'm here in Port Arthur. That's so typical. Texas. A lot of oil industry. And here you can actually see quite well the effects of LNG gas and of course fracking. And here someone is offering a tour that sounds a bit perverse. It's a toxic tour and that's exactly what I want to do now. I'm curious to see what I'll encounter there.
John Beard worked in the oil industry for 38 years. Now he has become its enemy because he says that the consequences of extraction and processing have become too bad for the local people. He takes us on a toxic tour to show us the extent of it all.
The earthquakes that have come from it, the polluting of aquifers and underground water systems, and also in some cases where the gas itself has just virtually come up out of the ground and caused the disruption of life and health in communities. While fracking has done some good on one aspect of it from an industrial standpoint, as far as the community is concerned and environmental justice, as well as the environment is concerned, it's not been a very good thing.
Fracking is associated with many different environmental consequences. One of the biggest problems, the water pollution. Many different chemicals are needed for fracking. Over 1,000 chemicals are known to be used. These are mixed with water and sand. After the actual fracking, so the breaking up of the ground, is completed, the water and sand remains as a waste.
Back there, that's the wastewater, the waste product from fracking, so it's being pumped out again. And there are still some chemicals in it that were used in fracking, It's all highly toxic, and it's stored here in large quantities in these tanks. Because what else would you want to do with it?
There are usually three options. The first is to treat the water, something that sounds logical, but is often not done for cost reasons. As a second option, the water can be pumped into old holes after the gas has been harvested from a fracking site. And as a third option, the water can be stored in tanks or sometimes even in open basins.
It's putting in danger countless thousands of people, millions of people here in the Gulf South, as well as people around the world, even in Europe.
People in the region are very concerned about fracking facilities and refineries, and many places directly next to the facilities are sparsely populated. This includes the so-called Cancer Alley, a 130-kilometer long area in which residential buildings and the oil and gas industry are located right next to each other, and which was given its name because there was a significantly higher number of cancer cases here than in the rest of the USA.
All around me, here are factories, and I'm not allowed to show them because the sheriff was just here and strongly told me that I better not do that.
Shell security called us out here because they thought people were taking pictures of the plant. So no photos of the plant, of anything. The plant that's highly protected.
Legally quite difficult, but to be honest, I don't want to get into a legal battle here. But it's also quite interesting because it leads to a point that I find very important. I have a report from the scientific service of the Bundestag here. And they say, to summarize, that a scientifically sound study from which a clear causal link between the fracking process in natural gas production and significantly higher risks of cancer diseases could not yet be derived. That makes perfect sense. So let's name it. Establishing a link between something and a cancer diagnosis is extremely difficult. But we are here in what's called Cancer Alley. This is a region in America where there are significantly more cancer cases than anywhere else in the country. And I met a few activists here, and they said always, when a study comes out that shows a connection, then the industry pays for 3 more studies that claim the opposite. Of course, that's a statement I can't verify. It could also be wrong, but when I think about how quickly the security service was here, how the sheriff got here to intimidate us, that definitely leaves you thinking.
So one first point is already apparent, and that is that fracking and the oil and gas industry are a problem for the health of the local people and nature. Residents I met on site told me, among other things, that inspections of the facilities here do not take place regularly, and that the chemicals used here are often considered trade secrets, something that is very much in line with my research. Under Trump in particular, there was a movement to abolish many rules, but there's another problem that goes beyond the local danger.
Okay, so fracking is currently being done here. In fact, the fracking is already over. Now gas is being extracted here. And one of the big problems with fracking is the issue of methane, specifically methane emissions.
Gas and oil have formed over 15 to 600 million years. Organic material that originates from substances that once lived, such as plants or animals, has been compressed under high pressure to become our fossil fuel. And now gas and oil are trapped underground. A large proportion of the gas down there consists of methane, something you might associate with farting cows, but it is actually also the product that we use at home for heating or, in some cases, to generate electricity. There's just one problem. Methane is 28 times more harmful to the climate over a period of 100 years than CO2 when it is released into the air. And many fracking facilities have leaks from which precisely this methane gas escapes.
One of the things we couldn't see right now, regarding the facility, it's actually super relevant, and maybe even a reason why all of this doesn't really make sense. What we do, I have a special camera, or rather images from a special camera, with which you can see the whole thing. This is a thermal imaging camera, and it shows that methane is leaking there. Methane is actually very important for us because we use it for heating. That's basically the component of natural gas that we want. The problem is only when it escapes into the air, is extremely harmful to the climate, and that is indeed the case. A pretty big problem because both during extraction and transport, a certain amount is always released. Methane is being emitted. Methan ausgestoßen.
Robert Habeck, Deputy Federal Chancellor and Federal Minister for Economic Affairs and Climate Protection of the Federal Republic of Germany, has said that we need LNG gas so that we can shut down coal-fired power plants.
Jetzt möge man sich vorstellen, was passiert, wenn wir 2024 sagen müssen, wir haben nicht genug Gas, wir müssen die Kohlekraftwerke weiterlaufen lassen.
But is it really true? I have an interesting preprint study by Professor Robert Howard from Cornell University. According to him, the greenhouse gas balance of LNG is at best the same as that of coal, but at worst up to 270% worse. One of the decisive factors there is that methane, unlike CO2, is converted over the long term, which is why emissions are significantly higher in the first 20 years than if you look at the whole thing over 100 years, which has a major impact on the effect. But to be honest, this short period of time is also quite relevant for us. I made an appointment to talk to him, because if his calculation is correct, the LNG deal would not only be expensive, but would also fall far short of its goals.
We think the preponderance of evidence in the US is that about a little over 2.5% of the methane in natural gas from shale is released unburned to the atmosphere when we develop it. And because of those CO2 emissions associated with the process and the methane, shale gas has a greenhouse gas footprint that's about the same as burning coal. Shale gas becomes worse when we liquefy it, so under the best, most optimistic conditions, using the most modern tankers and being careful, the greenhouse gas footprint of LNG is more than 25% worse than coal.
Howard sees an initial problem with the construction of the fracking site, which is crucial for LNG, as a large proportion of the LNG comes from fracking.
It's an energy-intensive process to drill those really deep, long wells. The hydraulic fracturing itself uses a tremendous amount of energy. So there's a lot of carbon dioxide emissions associated just with developing the fuel even before we burn it.
After the construction of the fracking plant, the most important issue is probably the methane leaks. No plant is perfect, and some methane is always released into the air, whether through leaks, defective flares, or sometimes deliberately, as pipes have to be emptied, and decommissioned plants are also a major problem. These emissions can either be measured at the plants themselves by overflights with airplanes and special cameras, or by satellites. Howard refers, among other things, to 12 studies with overflights or satellite data. A wide range of leakage rates was found here. This means the amount of methane that escapes. These values range from 0.4 to 17%. Howard says that he takes an average value of 2.6% from all the studies for his calculation, a value that will become important again later. In the next step, he evaluates the transportation and use of the LNG on site, focusing on electricity production rather than the distribution of gas to homes. Surprisingly, 32% of the gas in Germany is used to heat homes and only 12% is used to produce electricity.
If you put gas into a city and distribute it to homes and commercial buildings, there's more leakage associated with there, another 2.5%. But I ignored that for this paper because that's not what's going to the LNG plants. And instead, I assumed even at the destination point that the gas is going to go in a high pressure pipeline to an electric generating facility. If the gas is instead used to heat buildings in say, European cities or Chinese cities, then the emissions would be higher than I've estimated.
When I first shot this video in German, it was still a preprint study, but now it got published. I will link it in the description. Later in Germany, I will meet with researchers again to classify the whole thing. But I can also see one of the points mentioned in the paper in the USA, and that is another reason why LNG does not have a good balance sheet. I visit the last station before the gas comes to Germany.
So this is a terminal. Here comes the LNG. Over there is a freighter. Maybe the gas is on it, what we then use in Germany.
The gas from fracking is now transported via pipelines to so-called liquefaction plants, which are usually directly connected to the LNG-Terminals. What actually happens here is that the natural gas is purified again, so that almost only methane remains and can then be extremely cooled down in several stages. This makes the gas liquid, and liquids take up less space, just 1/600th of the original volume.
I say yes, it's really sick. It surpasses everything I could have imagined. Everything here is filled with this industry, and this incredibly beautiful nature is right next to it. And you think to yourself, what's happening here? It really leaves me thoughtful.
An incredible number of terminals are currently being built in Texas. There are already 2 LNG terminals in Port Arthur alone, and another one is under construction. Many of these terminals are also being built with German money, such as CP2 LNG here in Louisiana. I visit John Allaire, who lives just a few hundred meters from the new LNG terminals.
This is a property I purchased back in 1998. It's 311 acres. of marshland and Gulf beach frontage on the Gulf of Mexico. On this map, it shows where we're at right here. We're at this little circled X on the edge of this map. This is where they want to build the Commonwealth LNG export terminal. This is where the existing Venture Global Calcasieu Pass facility is. And this is the additional wetlands that Venture Global wants to double the size, triple the size of this existing facility here.
The LNG terminal next to John Aller's property is being financed by Energie Baden-Württemberg AG, and the contracts simply run for 20 years. Quite a long time with a pretty hefty price tag.
Germany, if you look at the U.S. Energy Information Administration's webpage, you can look up who paid what for LNG in 2022. And Germany, of all the major purchasers of LNG, Germany paid more per million BTUs than any other country in the world.
The construction of the terminals in Germany alone costs over 6 billion euros. But it is not only the gas itself that is expensive, but also the transportation of the gas is becoming increasingly expensive. And the gas that arrives in Europe ends up costing many times more than what it is sold for in the USA. Nevertheless, the LNG terminals are being built.
All of that back there is supposed to become an LNG terminal. So this scale is just crazy here. This is one of many different construction sites where they are building these LNG terminals. And we in Germany have committed to sourcing gas here for a very, very long time. And that's at quite a high price, both for the environment and financially. And I'm not entirely sure if this is really the right way to go. I would definitely take another look in Germany. What local solutions there might be, then you wouldn't need all this effort here. Dann braucht man diesen ganzen Aufwand hier nicht.
The ship is now underway with the gas for 4 to 7 weeks, time in which the methane is stored in the ship at minus 161 degrees Celsius so that it remains liquid. This is because the same ship can transport around 600 times the amount of gas. However, this liquid storage has also one major disadvantage. 10 to 20% of the energy contained in the gas has to be used to operate the refrigeration system. I'm going home to Germany, where I want to ask the politicians questions and clarify what the alternatives are. Before I take a look at an alternative for LNG imports, I would like to classify the study by Robert Howard because there has also been criticism of it, namely from Germany. Daniel Münter is an expert at the Institute for Energy and Environmental Research in Heidelberg, and he criticizes the study.
Man kann bei jeder Studie trifft man Entscheidungen, welche Dinge man miteinander vergleicht und welche Daten man wie einbindet. Und der Herr Howard hat sozusagen auf an diesen Punkten, wo er eine Wahl hatte, die Regler alle auf maximal gedreht. Also er hat sozusagen überall die ungünstigste Variante gewählt, beziehungsweise manchmal auch Dinge, die der realen Lieferkette von Öl und Gas nicht entsprechen. Und dann kommt so ein krasses Ergebnis am Ende raus, was dann auch nicht hilfreich ist.
Probably the biggest point of criticism relates to the methane emissions from fracking. This is because oil and gas are often extracted at the same time during fracking.
Das ist nämlich ein ganz heißes Thema. Man misst in der Atmosphäre, dass dieses Methan freigesetzt wird. Man misst sozusagen den Gehalt in der Atmosphäre. Man weiß, das muss da irgendwo aus dieser Öl- und Gasförderung rauskommen. Und was darum ganz viele Studien einfach nur angeben, ist, die messen die Gesamtmenge oder schätzen die ab, die in einem Fördergebiet freigesetzt wird und beziehen das dann nur auf die Erdgasförderung. Die sagen dann, pro Kubikmeter gefördertem Erdgas wird so und so viel Methan freigesetzt. Das ist jetzt erstmal einfach so ein Vergleichsmaßstab, der sich so ein bisschen etabliert hat in diesen Studien, der aber nicht hilft, wenn man zwei Energieträger miteinander vergleicht und diese Umweltlasten eigentlich sauber diesen Energieträgern zuteilen will. Und das macht Herr Howard auch nicht.
So gas and oil are produced in parallel, but the methane leaks are only attributed to gas production. Another of Münter's criticism is that oil and coal are actually difficult to compare because, as we have already seen, significantly more gas is used for heating than for electricity generation, and in heating, coal is actually only used for district heating. In response, Howard had already said that this would not make much difference to the result. If anything, it would worsen the balance for LNG gas. And at the same time, of course, Robert Habeck's argument was that we need the LNG gas to shut down the coal-fired power plants. So what do we do with the criticism? It's difficult to give a definite answer. But in the end, both sides actually agree, because both Howard and Münter say that we need an end to gas and coal. But what is the alternative to natural gas?
Before I start talking about politics, I wanted to take a look at something. What alternatives are there to natural gas and LNG imports? And actually, I found something, and it has to do with this. It's about biogas.
Biogas is often mentioned in the media as the alternative to natural gas, and it sounds charming. Biogas can be produced in a reactor from organic waste, liquid manure, or cultivated plants. The plants or residues ferment for around 3 to 4 weeks. This works because bacteria eat these substances and metabolize them to produce, among other things, methane, the same substance that makes up natural gas.
Okay, also wir sind hier bei der Anlage. Was wird hier genau gemacht?
Ja, das ist eine Biogasanlage, eine klassische Biogasanlage, die direkt aus Substraten, Mais und so weiter Strom und Wärme produziert.
Da hinten sieht man den Mais, ja. Hier sieht man Mist, also sieht aus, als würde es vom Bauern kommen. Was wird hier genau alles verarbeitet?
Also wir verarbeiten 3 Substrate im Wesentlichen. Das ist der Mais als Ganzpflanze, geerntet und geschreddert. Dann setzen wir Pferdemist ein, das ist das, was wir hier vorne sehen, und auch Geflügelmist.
The potential of biogas is really exciting, especially when it comes to waste or liquid manure. If liquid manure is otherwise simply stored in the open and used as fertilizer, methane also escapes into the air. If it is fermented in the reactor, it produces energy. Up to 90% less methane emission is released, and in the end, mineral fertilizer is also produced that can be used. But the problem is that specially grown maize makes up a big portion of the material for plants in Germany. This has also prompted the government to introduce a maize cap. Currently, only 40% of the material in biogas plants in Germany may be maize, and in 2026 only 30%. This is because growing maize specifically for biogas plants naturally takes away land that would actually be needed for growing food, and at the same time increases the cost of maize, for example by increasing demand and threatening biodiversity. But this is not even the main argument, because the plants can also be operated with slurry and manure, which is done in Denmark, for example, where biogas already accounts for 25% of gas consumption compared to just 1% in Germany.
Wie viel Energie wird jetzt hier produziert?
Natürlich ist das abhängig davon, wie viel Rohstoffe uns zur Verfügung stehen. Haben wir eine schlechte Ernte, wird weniger Energie produziert. Eine gute Ernte bedeutet mehr Energie. Aber in den letzten Jahren sind es jeweils so 6 Gigawattstunden, also 6 Millionen Kilowattstunden Strom und Wärme, die gleiche Größenordnung zusätzlich.
3000 Haushalte mit Strom und 600 bis 700 Haushalte kann man mit Wärme versorgen. Mit der Anlage hier. Das ist schon mal eine Menge.
Biogas cannot yet be processed in conventional gas heating systems, but it can be refined so that it is chemically equivalent to natural gas and can be fed into our gas network.
Also hier entsteht jetzt Biogas. Ja. Das ist nicht gleichzusetzen mit Erdgas, und einer der größten Unterschiede ist ja der Methangehalt. Wie hoch ist der Methangehalt hier in der Anlage?
Bei uns schwankt der Methangehalt zwischen 50 und 52%. Also an diesem Standort macht die Veredelung eigentlich wenig Sinn, weil wir eine sehr gute Wärmenutzung haben und die Biomethan-Herstellung, also aus Biogas Biomethan zu gewinnen, das man ins Erdgasnetz einspeist, macht vor allen Dingen dann Sinn, wenn man das Gas anders verwerten will, also in Blockheizkraftwerken, die beispielsweise direkt gebunden sind an Hallenbäder, an Krankenhäuser, an Wohnblocks, um die Wärme auch dort 100% nutzen zu können.
Also das heißt, wichtig, was man auf jeden Fall mitnehmen sollte, Biogas ist nicht gleich Erdgas. Chemisch ist das ein Unterschied. Und wenn man jetzt sagt, hey, man möchte wirklich Erdgas direkt ersetzen, heißt in unsere Pipelines einsetzen, dann müsste man es veredeln. Und das ist dann tatsächlich nochmal eine deutlich kompliziertere Geschichte.
The production of refined biogas is expensive. So expensive that it is only worthwhile if it is heavily subsidized or a certain feed-in tariff is guaranteed. For a long time, this was the case in Germany, but this is now gradually being reduced, with the result that many biogas plants are being shut down.
Ich habe auch tatsächlich mit relativ vielen Landwirten während der Recherche gesprochen und sie gefragt, ja, wie stehen Sie denn zu dem Thema? Und die Sache, die ich wirklich oft gehört habe, ist, naja, eine Biogasanlage zu betreiben, ist
ziemlich viel Arbeit. Und im Zweifelsfall lohnt es sich kaum. Also man kann oft gerade so die Betriebskosten reinbringen, gerade wenn es eine kleine Anlage auf dem Hof ist. Eine Sache, die ich schon gemerkt habe, bei den Landwirten, mit denen ich gesprochen habe, war es in der Regel schon so, dass sie selber nicht so richtig hinter dem Konzept der Biogasanlagen standen.
A study from 2022 concludes that around half of the natural gas used to generate electricity could be replaced with biogas. But overall, it estimates that the amount of biomethane in the total gas mix could only be scaled up to around 3%.
I personally think biogas plants are an exciting story and definitely something worth pursuing, especially when you can use waste from agriculture here, manure, slurry and so on. But completely replacing natural gas and LNG imports, that's probably going to be quite difficult. Das wird wahrscheinlich eher schwierig sein.
So, what should we make of the issue? In the end, these decisions were made by politicians, and I would like to enter into discussion with politicians. I went to a place where this is possible, namely the World Economic Forum in Davos. There I meet Omid Nouripour, member of the Bundestag and federal chairman of the Green Party in Germany.
Diese LNG-Deals, die da getroffen wurden, war das vielleicht überall, was da teilweise gemacht wurde? Weil tatsächlich, ich habe Amerikaner getroffen, die gesagt haben, okay, das war schon krass. Niemand hat so viel Geld gezahlt wie die Deutschen für das LNG-Gas.
Letztes Jahr hatten wir eine Situation, wo von heute auf morgen plötzlich die zentralen Zulieferungen aus Russland allen voran weggeblieben sind. Und da muss man schnell handeln. Ehrlich gesagt, die Fälle in Texas kann ich nicht beurteilen. Ich kenne die nicht, aber ich kann über unsere eigenen LNG-Terminals was sagen. Wir haben letztes Jahr zum Beispiel auch so manche Lücken schließen können, weil wir uns europäisch geholfen haben. Und nicht alles, was in LNG kommt, gerade ist für Deutschland.
Jetzt ist es so, dass viele von den LNG-Terminals ja nicht annähernd ausgelastet sind. Sind das nicht alles in diesem Jahr?
Manche auch, also ich sage jetzt mal abbaubar. Ja, manche sind auch quasi.
Aber ich meine, da wurde sehr viel Geld rein gemietet, aber dann auch, glaube ich, für 15 Jahre, 20 Jahre teilweise.
Okay. Ich habe es nicht, weiß ich nicht. Okay.
Ja. Aber sozusagen ist es schon für eine sehr, sehr lange Zeit. Und da frage ich mich, ob man sozusagen rückblickend oder von der jetzigen Position aus das anders bewerten würde.
Stand jetzt würde ich sagen nein, aber muss man auf der Strecke muss man sich angucken. Und ehrlich gesagt, was auch noch maßgeblich natürlich damit zusammenhängt, ist nicht nur sozusagen, was machen wir mit den Supplies und mit der Lieferung, sondern was machen wir denn, wie schnell kommen wir denn voran mit dem Ausbau der Erneuerbaren. Kann sein, dass man das eine oder andere über den Nachhinein überdenken muss, aber da wäre ich jetzt gedanklich noch nicht.
Okay, das heißt also, die Grünen würden jetzt erstmal sagen, okay, wir stehen zu der Entscheidung, uns auf LNG zu fokussieren, das zu importieren aus den USA.
Ja, das Entscheidende wird ja am Ende auch sein, dass man zum Beispiel die neuen Netze alle so baut, dass sie A2-ready sind und dass wir beispielsweise, wenn es genug Wasserstoff gibt, hoffentlich irgendwann mal bald, aber es dauert ewig, wie wir wissen, dass wir auch dann dementsprechend nicht alles nochmal von neuem erfinden müssen.
Well, the politicians don't want to see the LNG deal as a mistake, but the politicians don't seem to be really happy with it either. However, the last sentence of the interview is actually the most interesting.
Wenn es genug Wasserstoff gibt, hoffentlich irgendwann mal bald.
A difficult promise, because there's no question that we will need more hydrogen in the future, but it's not as easy as it's always promised to us. I also tried to film at an LNG terminal in Germany, but unfortunately this was not possible. I contacted various terminals and often received no response or even a refusal. For example, I received this response from the Brunsbüttel LNG terminal. Unfortunately, there's nothing to see on the site at the moment, just a green field. But we are currently working on a digital twin and are in talks with the universities of applied science about how we can support the conversion to hydrogen era there. On their website, they write that they are considering importing hydrogen in the future. Exactly what this will look like is still unclear. There's currently only one ship that can transport liquid hydrogen directly. It is a pilot project that is scheduled to run until 2030. There are still alternatives. Hydrogen can be transported in the form of ammonia or LOHC. The technology for this is known, but the capacities are currently still far too low and the additional conversion naturally costs energy. And distribution is not that easy either, because simply feeding it into the pipeline network is not possible. Hydrogen can react with metal and damage the hydrogen pipeline. For this reason, gas pipelines must first be checked to see whether they are suitable for transporting hydrogen, and if so, under what conditions. So, was the LNG deal with the USA really such a bad deal? It's always easy to evaluate something like this later. At the time, fears were high and the news of a gas shortage was almost hysterically. But with a little distance, we can now say that many of the actions were an overreaction. A study by the German Institute for Economic Research concludes that we have significantly more capacity than we need, and they advise reconsidering many of the locations and stopping the expansion. An assessment that even the country that probably benefits the most from exports came to. Under President Biden, they stopped the construction of new LNG terminals. The potential consequences for our planet, and if we're honest, also President Biden's fear of climate protectors, who were an important electoral group for him and whom he previously angered with the expansion of natural gas production, are too great. But now, with Trump as a president, he's planning to do even more fracking and sell more LNG. Interestingly, this does not necessarily mean that the construction of renewable energies will be stopped. In fact, a large part of the Green Deal's subsidies will go to Republican states, and many jobs will be tied to these projects. But he will abolish regulations and thus ensure that the limits for methane emissions, for example, will be even lower than they already are. The dirty gas and oil will probably get even dirtier. And Germany has put itself in an awkward position because we have built so many LNG terminals that they are nowhere near full capacity. In fact, many terminals in Germany have not been used for months because the demand for gas has already been met. Critics, such as the Deutsche Umwelthilfe, now fear that Trump will push for the purchase of LNG imports and threaten with possible tariffs if the deal does not go through. Now, I would say this video has taken an interesting turn. I went to the US while Biden was in charge. Now with Trump, things are probably going to get even more ridiculous on LNG considering this deal. And also, another thing happened in the meantime. METHSAT and Google have launched a satellite that can detect methane leaks from space, and they are making this information available to everyone. A pretty powerful innovation that will help shed some more light on the dark spots. My personal opinion after spending several months on the subject: we still know far too little. I have often heard inconsistent statements. So now would actually be the time to review the Hastile made decisions and see in which direction it can go. Politicians must take this time. So far, I don't have the feeling that this is happening enough. With the US just voted and Germany is having an election in a few days, this might be even more important than ever before. As a German, I have to say I'm careful with dependencies, because after the last crisis we just had because of these dependencies, it's a good question how much we want to go straight into the next dependency, this time dependency on the US. And also from the perspective of America, it is the question if you really want to push a technology that uses toxic chemicals to get oil off the ground while you have technologies that are way more promising for a green future. But what do you think about that? What do you think of the LNG deal and how do you think things will change with Trump? I'm really curious about your opinion and also write from where you are writing around the world. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone who helped me with the research for this documentary. It was by far the most time-consuming video I've made in a long time and I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please share this video so it reaches as many people as possible. And of course, subscribe and don't forget to turn on the bell so you don't miss any more videos. I say auf Wiedersehen, this is goodbye in German.